So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is FNU Hera, and then welcome to the DuPont Summit 2023. So I'm the program coordinator for the Policy Study Organizations, and today we have the Dr. Yoonjin Park with us. So Dr. Yoonjin Park, would you like to take over and tell a little bit about yourself and the topic?
Okay, thank you so much for hosting my talk. I'm professor at the Howard University, and I've been actually studying communication technology and policy. So I'm glad to actually hear many of the related policy issues today. I'm currently actually faculty associate at Harvard Law School, and they do interested in so many issues about the data and AI. So I try to actually come up with this topic. One that I present today is still under review. Hopefully by the time this video actually posted, it's going to be online and published. So let me start. Okay, good. So again, this is one of the underlying the project that I've been actually doing, touching upon digital domain and preparedness and well-being. Kind of question is very simple one that I'm asking: what will happen to us digitally when we actually die? And I think about this issue a lot because many of the things that we do actually remain, but nonetheless, our actually life isn't very finite. Before we actually start, I always wonder about this one. Actually, I try to actually grab two possibilities when actually technology come into our life. One is mobilization, the other was reproduction. One, mobilization, if you actually see it on the left, you see high socioeconomic status people benefit, and then and low socioeconomic people benefit catching up. So from the very bottom, they actually catching up the high status people. So gap between high and low actually shrunk. And on the other end, there is the other possibility where that actually the gap actually increasing. So we could say that this is a reproduction of the socioeconomic inequality rather than technology helping us. Technology might be actually reproduce the inequality. So under this big possibility, I see that what this question about digital remain actually will turn out. So as I said earlier, I'm old enough to actually remember the movie of Back to the Future, which is old movie, 1980s, and then Terminator, all that. You could see these days, and still, public imagination about how we actually survive our deaths has always been there. There are infinite number of novels I can think about. And you can see that whether we do all kinds of digital activity using the refrigerator, driving self-driving car, or watching the movie in the Netflix, it actually generates tons of the data. The problem is that the data remain after our life actually done. And some of the implication is that the commercial entity might actually access to it, actually using it and assemble. This is South Korea documentary called I Met You. That's not me, but one of the producers there. The mom actually have missed her daughter who happened to die when she was 7. So she actually teamed up with some documentary producers and PR and AI team. They reassembled the image of the girl who happened to die several months ago. So this is documentary. Obviously, it's a sad thing. But again, if you actually see this documentary, you could see that how much actually the image of the daughter is realistic. And the mom is crying, try to actually touch her despite the fact that this is really virtual self. Now, in a real life, in a real instance, the Facebook has this kind of issue a lot. In the German, early on, has some of the issue. Issue was that the teenager daughter in German committed suicide, and her parents actually tried to access to her data, Facebook account. to see that whether actually school bullying actually happened or what kind of interaction she actually had before she committed suicide. And Facebook, interestingly, refused to actually release that data to her parents, arguing that it's a privacy. So it's actually end up actually reaching the Supreme Court in German, which is very astounding. So eventually, German court actually side with her parents, saying that it is just work just like any other physical remain. So what the court actually end up saying is, we don't have to actually use any other law because it is strictly about inheritability. So one of the things that they actually said is access issue, asset issue. There is no further new law actually applied. So physically transfer from the one living being, because that person actually deceased, whoever actually happened to have that right to actually possess that digital right, they actually apply to it. But again, we have to think about how well this kind of law is actually will help. And is there any other loophole we could actually expect? In a literature, obviously, law school has a lot of issue about this kind of discussion, but empirical scientist myself wonder about how individual people think about this issue. So I do the survey and think about how much public actually understand this issue and whether this kind of issue actually related to their well-being and relate to privacy and their understanding. So some of the theory, it might not be really well known outside of the communication theory, but communication field, really, we are fascinated with the digital divide issue for a long time. Because going back to the early 90s, internet divide, those who has the divide, I mean, the access to the internet versus those who are not, obviously it possessed a deeper issue about how much society actually divided. And coming from that, a lot of scholars actually develop, it is not just about the access, but it is about digital literacy, how much people actually understand internet. And now the scholars actually posing that not only that digital literacy, there may be some other related area access divide actually happening. So they call it as first, second, and third, and it is all connected. I'm using this kind of theory to just think about and understand digital remain issue. So I said socioeconomic studies, and all the way to digital readiness about digital remain issue, and how much that is related to how much we think about ourselves being ready and well-being. So some of the methodology, digital measure, access, literacy, readiness, and non-digital measure, how much actually people's education, gender, and race, and income, and well-being, how much they think that they are actually satisfied with their life. So all that, I actually ran it, although it might not be really fascinating. For me, what I found is that a social class, in other words, income and education, is a clear divided line. In other words, how much they have access to the internet, how much they know about internet and this issue, how much they think that they are ready and aware about this digital remain issue, how much they think that they are ready for other human activity, all related. In other words, social class is really a pretty dominant determinant or predictor of the divide. So one fascinating thing I actually found is that when we actually map out this gap between old and young people, and it's the same to many other. In other words, age gap, how much they access to it, how much they understand. Young people used to be better and still better than relatively younger users. And it seems that this issue, despite that this one actually done 2018, although it's quite a number of years ago, still it's not shrinking. And if we actually go back, we saw this exact same pattern So what we actually seeing is this replication of the social gap. What I found is, again, age, but again, any other issue, same pattern actually exists. So what's the fundamental implication of this study is that, again, there is a cumulative disadvantage for certain population. And this giving a carryover effect about individual when they think about their capability. And it is important that digital literacy is kind of relaying effect. In other words, just having enough of the access in a digital, it's not enough for them to realize, know about digital remaining issue. Here, digital literacy measure is just measure of the very genetic knowledge about internet. And this is pretty much an important predictor. So in other words, access without digital literacy, they do not have ready for this kind of issue. So I found another study that similar things actually going on repeatedly. So why does it matter? Obviously, if we actually think about AI going into, AI in essence doing a lot of things, and then AI doesn't mean anything without data. And then if we actually think about this issue, similar issue like climate change, Ron Inglehart, actually, who just passed away 3 years ago, he was my professor. He actually see that as a climate justice issue. Is that only rich people care in a rich country? So when he actually threw out the survey, despite the fact that it should be mattered to many other Africa and Asia countries, it only end up actually European and American, North American actually concerned that we have an issue here. So this kind of issue going back to some of the policy statement, Jenga is one of the game site I looked at, and their actually statement about the policy. So what they actually still actually presenting is once we stop using the account, even if it's inactive, okay, all the data will be actually going to that. So whatever they do, we don't have any right to that. And Google has the same thing. So even if, what Google actually saying, once you actually start using the Google and YouTube, even if you stop using the services, some of the data they actually collect is remain their property. This kind of issue, again, a bit scary, knowing that the data will be certainly commercially exploited. Some gigantic company like, obviously Tesla. Tesla actually introduced robots. And obviously Metaverse, that the Facebook now changed the name, although they scale down how much Metaverse will be the one, but they actually reframe it as AI issue. And this one I met you in South Korea cases. Kakao back there is a gigantic company. Almost 90% of the South Korea population using the Kakao. So given that the data actually have access to it, we have a tremendous issue about whether actually using the data and then how much actually have to use the data to access to certain type of digital services. We actually end up actually giving out the data to the commercial services. So latest developments still, they do come up with some of the solution, legacy content, inactive account manager, and so on. But I found it as, again, if people do not know much about this kind of issue, it doesn't mean that much. And possible solution, again, many people suggest it should be just individual or commercial platform should be just have ethical guideline, or otherwise government should just restrict the data. Perhaps to me, all these solutions may be possibly, but I'm concerned that this kind of logic, this is from the Oxford. They actually working on this issue quite some time, even before me. What they're actually saying that it's ethical guideline for the industry. And I'm not quite sure ethical guideline alone by the industry set them for themselves. will be the kind of solution that how much actually data could be protected. Given that again, data subject already deceased and data remain, I don't know how much actually those kind of ethical guidelines will actually make sense. So fundamental question again, we do have this data issue. US lifetime, we only live 78. During the pandemic, actually it goes down 76. It's a lot lower than OECD standard. But my problem is the data. We could actually think about it, even some of the data. People actually estimate if a woman actually pregnant and access to a certain type of product online, they could access how much that when the baby will come out. So it could actually predict the pre-bio life and afterlife. This is kind of life that we might actually end up living with. That's the concern actually remain. So fundamentally, again, data use commercial and data object, we become some kind of data object instead of subject. And we do have a power asymmetry between gigantic platform and individual user. So that's the concern that I'm raising here instead of some kind of solution. So big question here before I go. This is kind of a good story that some robot AI actually dumping in the middle of nowhere, in the downtown, in the University of Munich in Germany. And then it says in a very small memo, it says, please take me to the destination in the center of the city. And then the robot cannot do a steer. So the only thing is go straight or left or right. And then end up actually getting into the destination. And then people actually help. A similar story actually happened in the New York City. So why I'm suggesting this one, despite all the data problem, I think that we, as a human being, genuinely care about this kind of dignity, data. Even if there is nothing valuable about our data, the fact that data is in the hands of someone and they could actually manipulate, that actually raises a fundamental question about ethical value here. Again, I'm going to skip this one. Going back to this kind of positive enable possibility and negative curtailment and limit of the technological policy, we have to think about whether which direction we should actually channel all the resources into. That to me, that seems very obvious, but it's how we actually get there is very difficult one to answer.
Definitely, yeah. So is there any question that you guys want to ask? Okay, yes. Okay, there you go.
Sorry, I didn't hear your presentation from the very beginning, but there has been a discussion, all right, that Google, Meta now has to compensate the authors that were used in their to create sort of the various products they have now. Is this possible to disentangle? Because it's not only that they read a text, they may kind of argue what weighting factor they used in terms of the text. So it's much more complex than figuring out. So where is that discussion? And I mean, in traditional publishing, if the author dies, the heirs, inherit the rights.
Right.
So what is happening also with that now? Who inherits the rights that Meta and Google have used?
Yeah, that's interesting and great question. Actually, that used to be all the time. What people actually care is that some famous author died, and asset is valuable. My problem with that is that we ordinary people actually generate so many content these days, right? So even if it's not really valuable, let's say to the human being or history, ordinary people has tremendous data, the valuable to their family perhaps, or him or herself. So how much actually ordinary people's data should be protected? Fascinating talk about how much actually should ordinary people get compensated. That's a great question. It's late 90s, even internet data and privacy issue. Some of the folks at the UC Berkeley Law actually presenting, it is our property. Therefore, if the internet company actually using it, they have to pay. That's one way to think about it, but I a bit hesitate. First, those companies who can pay so many individual users will be parts Google, Facebook, Amazon, and small companies cannot. So again, if we're actually looking at the AI, how much those gigantic companies could compensate, let's say, even if there is a feasible solution, only a handful of them actually will be actually pull off those kind of market solution. So that's another issue to think about. So where the discussion is going, EU actually having a lot of AI Act, but although skim through their boring, dry policy document, none of this issue actually coming out about how much actually people die and all count actually. I think that one of the reason is, again, the subject will be disappear. So themselves is not really able to voice their channel. The other issue is that even 1980s, OECD actually have this kind of integrity issue. So what they actually have is that once data collected, they should not use the data for other purpose than original collection. So I think that they try to figure that existing law or guidelines still applicable. But again, if that's so, then they're not really pay attention to this issue. So a lot of things, a lot of complex issue, yeah, it remain. Oh yeah, sure.
Individuals, it's also publishing companies.
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, when you publish a paper with Springer or whatever, you in a sense assign the copyrights to them, and so it's not only the individuals, the authors, but the publishing companies. So who compensates? You know,
ChatGPT, obviously, I mean, they are actually using it, using all the data, but again, how much compensation they could do will be Google, perhaps Amazon, and then it's a fair to actually get the compensated authors. I would actually love to get compensated based on my writing, but again, that could be another behind the door industry negotiation. And then we saw APEC and then EU actually summit, November actually happened. Some of the people actually invited in those kind of negotiation. None of the civic center actually, the Sam Altman from the OpenAI, he's the one actually invited to the EU policymakers. So whatever they actually discuss, I'm not sure this kind of issue actually raised.
Yeah, and also it's depending on the platform as well. Like, for example, because he's talking about the social media platform, right? If you are on the Facebook, or if you know someone who's already passed away or who already deceases, right? So you can just go to his or her simply account and you can report by saying that this person is deceased. So then once like you or like 5 or 6 after report, the Facebook going to like closely monitor to the specific accounts whether that account's going to be active or not. If it's not activing in a couple of days, then they just gonna delete all the data in that account. That account is officially closed. So that's one thing that coming up. And the second thing is also depending on the platform that you're using, right? You talk about the articles and stuff. So now Facebook, social media, YouTube, and so on, and so many like platforms, like, you know, now peoples are doing the content, right? With the content, they're earning a lot of money. So then we cannot just go and complain by saying that, well, we provide you the content, we provide you the data, so you have to give me a compensation. And then they will kind of come and get you by saying that, we have the content platforms. If you provide the content enough, so like based on the monetizations of the data, we also giving you the compensation, or in a way of saying a salary, or the depending on the how much public you can reach to, depending on the how much viewers or the what do we call the audience you have. So for those data, for giving or like, you know, letting them accessing having those data, they are also paying the money. So those are the also things that you have to think about. So yeah.
First, thank you for an excellent presentation. This is by far the best talk I've been to at this whole conference, and it was reason enough for coming to the conference. I'm wondering whether the legal framework for what we call celebrities. After they die, the rights to make a film about their life, the slippery slope between documentation and interpretation. The legal framework is very clear that you can artistically interpret what you think of that person's life, okay, but you can't change some of the facts. And who controls that? She brought up the question of the estate owning it. So can we use the legal framework for that to transpose onto the digital world?
I suppose, I think that's a one possibility of it. So I pose the question as very broad and ethical issue. So there is a narrowly defined way of actually protecting those data, and someone could actually think about that issue in a very narrow sense. But interpretation about data, who you are, what kind of things, in the AI world, I think that becomes much more. In a copyright issue, it's falling to the fair use. I mean, if it becomes creative side of it, and it's clear that it's different from original work. But again, this kind of thing, we don't know what the platform actually will do, and then has been doing, and derivative the work. And that's the kind of concern that in the paper itself I actually talk about. So yeah, I mean, obviously those kind of existing law could be applicable, but again, we have to actually raise this awareness in the public. At the same time, policymakers, so that actually they pay attention to much more granular way than just AI. We have to do something on copyright, and then they negotiate with the platform. So that's kind of the issue that I'm trying to
give
raise.
you one more example. If you're a historian, you go off and dig up facts about whatever it is you're writing about. You could imagine any of the social media platforms for somebody who's famous going into basically their internet search history to reconstruct who this person really was. In the same sense, a historian would go after documents. So they have this huge amount of data that certainly reflects upon who you were. Let's say you said, I never ever went to this country, and we can actually say, oh yes, they did.
Right.
So that data has a meaning that's proportional or maybe dependent upon sort of the importance of the person involved, but it's non-trivial. And I think that's where it'd probably be tested the first time, when they actually start doing something, because there's no consent there.
No consent, and then how much public would understand, let's say, those kind of images created. And then as empirical, the study, people are not, including myself. Even sometimes I made a mistake with the spam, to be honest, although,
Okay, one last question.
Your presentation about the German court and the mother and the virtual child, it struck a chord because there's the idea that you never really die as long as your memory is alive. Well, what if, with all of our knowledge and the facts about us now becoming digital, if somebody wanted to eradicate our existence, how much simpler it would be with the technology than it might have been to have to destroy every book by an author in order to eradicate the memory of that individual. So that comes down to a question of who has control of it, if only to protect the fact that the person existed.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. So I just the memory and how we actually remember certain people and how we want to be remembered. That's a fundamental issue. So I think that, I think there's a kind of book project, but it was one paper issue. So I try to actually empirically study how much people actually understand. So hopefully, I'm glad that you will find it as interesting. Thank you very much.
Sure. So thank you so much, Dr. Yeonjin Park, for answering those questions. And and thank you so much for this wonderful presentations.
Thank you.